At the dawn of the 20th century, another war between the great powers was much talked about. Yet, the nature of a European war, as opposed to a colonial venture, was little understood. What was known were the many swift forays by superior forces against distant, feeble foes. Machine guns against spears. Massive naval firepower against antique guns. These engagements met with quick, easy victory for the Europeans. However frightening those conflicts could be for those who took part in them, the politicians at home had little sense of the horror of these new weapons. Why should war in Europe be feared? In the spring of 1914, war was a gay, droll affair. Armies marched with flags waving in the breeze, troops in brightly colored uniforms with big shiny buttons. That was about to change. The route which led the major powers of Europe to war in 1914 was long and tortuous, with many factors driving them to armed conflict. Perhaps the most important and obvious was the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. That limited confrontation had seen the humiliating defeat of France and the unification of the German states under Prussian leadership. The sudden emergence of the German Empire, which, as part of the spoils of victory, took the provinces of Alsace and Lorraine from France, brought about a fundamental shift in the European balance of power. Germany's accelerated progress towards economic and military ascendancy only intensified the anxieties of her neighbors. In 1913, Germany was second only to America as the most powerful industrial nation in the world. For the better part of 2 decades, between 1871 and 1890, the new European status quo was not seriously challenged, thanks to the diplomatic dexterity and deviousness of Otto von Bismarck, the German chancellor who kept France isolated. When Bismarck left office in 1890, it was not long before a fresh series of unpredictable currents began to erode the foundation of his carefully constructed continental system. A rapid deterioration in Russo-German relations and a rapprochement between Republican France and Tsarist Russia compelled Germany to strengthen her existing links with the Austro-Hungarian dual monarchy. This alliance ensured that she possessed an ally to the east. Germany would pay a heavy price for a policy that tied her more closely to a dilapidated empire that was itself finding it increasingly difficult to curb the nationalist aspirations of its diverse population. The potentially explosive situation in the Balkans was made more dangerous by the decline of Turkish influence. In seeking to exploit such opportunities, Austria and Russia each embarked upon a course which could only end in confrontation. The rise of Serbia added yet another hazardous element to an unstable regional mixture. Serbia had been infuriated by Austria's annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1908. In turn, Serbia gained influence and territory as a result of the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913, giving Austria mounting cause for irritation. With the departure of Bismarck, the belligerent and erratic Wilhelm II, who had become Kaiser in 1888, soon spurred Germany to follow a more aggressive path in international relationships. France, already determined to avenge the disaster of 1870 and win back her lost provinces, was further alarmed by Germany's developing industrial and military muscle. Russia, too, had grounds for concern about an Austro-German alliance that not only threw an ominous shadow across her western frontier, but was likely to counteract Russian interests in the Balkans. The first and probably the most significant crack in the edifice erected by Bismarckian diplomacy came in 1892, the removal of its cornerstone, the isolation of France. That year, Russia and France concluded a military agreement, reinforced by additional talks in 1893 and 1894, under which each promised to come to the other's aid if either was attacked by Germany. This change from Bismarck's Realpolitik to the Weltpolitik of Kaiser Wilhelm II ultimately forced Britain to review her relations with the other leading players on the European and world stages. Britain was relatively friendly with Germany for much of the last quarter of the 19th century, not the least because Queen Victoria's eldest daughter was married to the German Crown Prince Frederick, who succeeded to the imperial throne in March 1888. When Frederick died from cancer after reigning for barely 3 months, the accession of his estranged son, Wilhelm II, heralded fresh competition with Britain for colonies and overseas markets. The new Kaiser sought world power status for Germany. His first public words as Kaiser were not to the public, but were addressed to the army.
We belong to each other, I and the army. We were born for each other and will indissolubly cleave to each other. I promise ever to bear in mind that from the world above, the eyes of my forefathers look down on me, and that I shall one day have to stand accountable to them for the glory and honor of the army.
At the beginning of the 20th century, Europeans and Americans were fascinated by speculations about the future. A new genre of fantasy fictions catered to their tastes. Jules Verne and H.G. Wells were the pioneers in creating tales of scientific and technological marvels, of flying machines, life below the oceans, and interplanetary travel. Only a few saw the dark side of the story, a human race that made use of its amazing possibilities by calling forth explosive new powers of destruction.
They were looking ahead to a war that they were pretty sure was going to happen. They didn't know exactly when, they didn't know exactly where, but they were pretty sure that in the not too distant future there was going to be a war in Europe, one way or the other, and everyone wanted to have the best weaponry, the best equipment possible. And so they began to pour some money into all kinds of military technology, but aircraft are included in this.
What Europe was building towards was not a better world, but a giant smash-up.
They didn't understand what it could be used for, or at least that's what those who were more enthusiastic about it argued. Those who were pushing for the use of aircraft, the very early airmen, as it were, they saw tremendous potential for the aircraft as not just an observation, artillery spotting kind of task, which is what most of the generals saw it as. This was the ultimate high ground, you know, not using balloons or dirigibles here, but you could use this mobile aircraft to spot the enemy, so you could Ranger artillery and so on. But they saw it as having other functions in battle. And as the war went on, they came up with more and more as they experimented with how to use this. And they complained over and over again that the ground generals simply didn't understand what this machine could do for them. And were wasting it, using it simply for observation or for reconnaissance or for photographing or whatever they were using it for, and that it could be an offensive weapon. And they begin to talk about fighters and bombers. Bombing became the big thing. Remember, World War I, it had stalemated in that trench warfare in France. And most of the war was fought just in inches, really. You come over the top and maybe move the line a little bit, and then the other side would come over the top and maybe move it a little bit the other way, and it was just mass slaughter. And the airmen began to argue that airplanes were free of this. They were above the ground. They could fly anywhere and could strike anything. And so they really began to tout the aircraft as a strategic bomber, where you could use it to go back and fly against supply lines and factories and hit public morale and end this horrible, horrible war and end it much more quickly.
Looking back, the most remarkable feature of the pre-war international landscape was the accelerating arms race. The German armaments firm Krupp was the largest single business in Europe. Its giant rivals, Skoda, Creusot, and Vickers Maxim, were also enormous. A technological breakthrough would render all existing weapons of that nature obsolete, but risk leaving the opposing country naked before its enemies during the years it required to catch up.
Well, in Europe, the governments there were also interested in all kinds of military technology, including potentially the aircraft. If you know your history of Europe, the European powers were in an arms buildup for most of the early 20th century. They were building up their navies, they were building up their armies. Here was another potential weapon for them, and they weren't going to let anybody else get something that might give them an advantage in this arms race. So Britain, France, Germany, Italy, they're all interested in this new technology. Many of them bought early Wright aircraft or the rights to build early Wright aircraft.
The German army, led by Prussia, was the most powerful military organization in the world. But it was Germany's naval expansion that alienated Britain.
Our naval power involved British existence. If our naval supremacy were to be impaired, the whole fortunes of our race and empire would perish and be swept utterly away.
Shaped by Rear Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz with the Kaiser's support, the Kriegsmarine disclosed its intention to construct a fleet of 38 battleships within 20 years. Regarding Britain as the most dangerous bloc to Germany's growth, Tirpitz envisioned the German fleet as a political pawn, which would strengthen his country's hand in world affairs. The launching of 14 battleships in Germany between 1900 and 1905 inaugurated a naval arms race that would enter an even more menacing phase when Britain launched the revolutionary, turbine-driven, all-big-gun battleship HMS Dreadnought in 1906. Each launching drove Germany and England farther apart.
I explained to him that the real ground for the growing antagonism in this country towards Germany was not jealousy of her rapidly expanding commerce, but fear of her growing navy.
The Kaiser did not care.
I do not wish for a good understanding with England at the expense of the extension of the German fleet.
There was no great mystery as to who potential enemies were likely to be. France and Russia were known to be allies, driven together by Germany's threat to both of them. Germany was closely bound up with Austria-Hungary and also was allied with the unreliable Italians, even though the Italians still harbored territorial claims against Austria. German backing for the Boers during the South African War of 1899 to 1902 hastened the demise of Britain's earlier isolationist policy. The various war crises of the early 20th century jolted the great powers into initiating joint staff talks with armed forces of their allies. In 1904, Britain signed the Entente Cordiale, which greatly strengthened the diplomatic and military tie with her traditional rival, France. A similar understanding was reached with Russia in 1907. Thus, before the close of the 19th century, Britain had swung noticeably towards a Franco-Russian alliance. The understandings with France and Russia did not constitute formal agreements, and neither did they commit Britain irrevocably to go to war in support of either power. But she was morally bound to France and Russia against the Central Powers. An unforeseen incident involving one or more of these countries might well ignite a general conflagration, which, because of the rival alliance systems, could engulf them all. The final trigger for war would be the pent-up pressure of nationalism within the polyglot Austro-Hungarian Empire. Various nationalist groupings were plotting. Their intention was to liberate all Serbs from their oppressors to create a greater Serbia. To this end, they recruited a formidable membership. They were highly motivated conspirators, and in June 1914, they were given their chance to change the world. Sunday, June 28, 1914, the heir to the Austrian-Hungarian throne, was making a goodwill visit to Sarajevo. In the early morning, Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his consort, Sophie, prayed at Mass in a chapel set up for them at their hotel. Leaving the suburban spa, they boarded a train to Sarajevo, a trip of less than half an hour. At the railroad terminal on the outskirts of town, they transferred to automobiles, in which they rode the rest of the way. The procession of chauffeur-driven cars entered Sarajevo somewhere between 9:30 and 10 a.m., heading for the town hall. The morning rain had stopped. The top of the car was lowered. That morning, Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb teenager whose career choice was to be a martyr, had stationed himself and his fellow conspirators along the Apel embankment at 3 different places where it was intersected by bridges. The Archduke's motorcade, driving along the quay, therefore would be running a gauntlet of nationalist killers. At the first of the bridges, the Archduke's procession entered a kill zone. 3 conspirators formed a line along the riverside of the quay and 2 on the land. The first attempt on the Archduke's life came from the riverside, from Nedeljko Kabrinovic, who asked a nearby policeman to point out which was Franz Ferdinand's car. Then he knocked the cap off his bomb on a lamppost to detonate it. He threw the bomb wildly at the Archduke's car, hitting the folded back hood of the convertible, from which it rolled off to explode against a wheel of the car following it. The Countess felt a graze on her neck from the detonator, while occupants in the car behind received slight wounds. Princip, who had heard the explosion and shouts from the crowd, hurried to the spot where it looked as though all was over. The gendarmes had Kabrinovic firmly in custody and were hauling him off to the police station. None of the other conspirators was to be found. Alone, Princip wandered back to what had been his appointed station on the riverside of the Appel embankment at what was called the Latin Bridge. He then crossed the street. Of the other conspirators, one was so jammed in the crowd that he could not pull the bomb out of his pocket. A second saw a policeman standing near him and decided that any movement was too risky. A third felt sorry for the Archduke's wife and did nothing. A fourth lost his nerve and slipped away home. Franz Ferdinand decided to cancel existing plans, which called for his motorcade to maneuver through winding alleys on the way to the museum. After a stop at the town hall for a reception and speeches, he insisted on driving to the hospital to visit Colonel Marisi, lightly wounded in the bombing attack. The driver in the lead car was not told of the change in plans and turned off the main road towards the museum. When the Archduke's driver realized the mistake, he halted his car to consider how best to get back on the route to the hospital. They sat motionless, less than 5 feet from the dejected Princip. He was astonished at his sudden good fortune. He quickly seized his chance. He reached for a bomb in his pocket, but became aware that, hemmed in by the crowd, he could not swing his arm to toss it at his target. So he pulled out his pistol and fired 2 shots at point-blank range. His first shot hit the Archduke in the jugular. His second shot caught the Duchess in the abdomen as she was rising to her husband's aid. Princip then turned the revolver on himself, but was prevented from firing it by a bystander who hurled him to the ground. Confusion erupted as the crowd and nearby police battled one another to get at the boyish assassin. Princip tried once again to kill himself. Reaching into his pocket, he removed a capsule and swallowed. The poison was old and only made the assassin vomit when it did not work. The mob closed in about him and began to beat him. Eventually, the police wrestled him away from the crowd. Meanwhile, the limousine fled to seek help. Sophie dear, don't die. Stay alive for our children," Franz Ferdinand called out. And then, more weakly, he repeated over and over, "It is nothing," as aides anxiously asked how he felt. The first shot was fired at about 10:30 a.m. Sophie died at roughly 10:45, the Archduke at around 11 a.m. Had the murders in Sarajevo been committed even a century earlier, it would have taken weeks or months for word of it to reach faraway places. The consequences might have been far different, but technology had changed things. The foreign offices of the world knew of the shooting at once. In Germany, the Kaiser was informed while racing in a regatta aboard his yacht Meteor. Wilhelm decided to return to Berlin. In England, the outrage, as the assassinations were called, dominated the foreign reporting published in the morning's London Times. In France, at the first cabinet meeting since the assassinations, the killings were hardly mentioned. Indeed, in all the capitals of Europe, the reaction to the assassination of the heir to the Habsburg throne was calm to the point of indifference. The truth of the matter was that few in Austria-Hungary were sorry that Franz Ferdinand had been removed from the scene. True, the leaders of the dual monarchy deplored the killing of royalty, but if someone of the blood had to be sacrificed, the Archduke was everybody's choice. Of course, the heir apparent was next only to the Emperor, the most important figure in the Habsburg Empire. In murdering him, upstart Serbian terrorists threw down a public challenge to the very existence of the empire. If Vienna failed to respond, it would lose by default. The assassination was not the reason that the dual monarchy sought to destroy Serbia. The Habsburg Empire had wanted to destroy Serbia before the assassination. The killings gave Vienna an excuse, not the reason, for snuffing out the Serbian challenge to Austro-Hungarian authority in the Balkans. First, Austria sought Germany's backing, which in turn saw in the Austro-Serbian confrontation a golden chance of securing hegemony in Europe, achieving world status while splitting the encircling Entente powers, forestalling Russian modernization, and eradicating the dangers to Austria-Hungary. The Kaiser believed that, as in the past, they could keep this conflict local without going to war with the other powers. The German ambassador to the dual monarchy reported to the Kaiser.
Count Berchtold, the Austro-Hungarian foreign minister, told me today that everything pointed to the fact that the threads of the conspiracy to which the Archduke fell a sacrifice ran together at Belgrade. I frequently hear expressed in Vienna, even among serious people, the wish that at last a final and fundamental reckoning should be had with the Serbs.
The Kaiser noted in the margin of his copy of the report, "Now or never." 4 days later, on July the 6th, he sent a message to the Austrian Emperor.
The Emperor Franz Joseph may rest assured that His Majesty will faithfully stand by Austria-Hungary, as is required by the obligations of his alliance and of his ancient friendship.
And with that, on the same day, the Kaiser went back on a summer cruise on the royal yacht in Scandinavian waters. As Europe continued its perfect summer vacation, Austria went off to cash Germany's blank check of unconditional support against Serbia. Having obtained Germany's endorsement, Austria issued a 10-point ultimatum to Serbia, 25 days after the assassination of the Archduke. Their plan, developed in coordination with the German Foreign Office, was to force a military conflict that would, Vienna hoped, end quickly and decisively with a crushing Austrian victory before the rest of Europe, namely Serbia's powerful ally, Russia, had time to react. According to the terms of the ultimatum delivered on July 23rd, the Serbian government would have to accept an Austro-Hungarian inquiry into the assassination, notwithstanding its claim that it was already conducting its own internal investigation. Serbia was also to suppress all anti-Austrian propaganda and to take steps to root out and eliminate terrorist organizations within its borders. One such organization, the Black Hand, was believed to have aided and abetted the Archduke's killer, Gavrilo Princip, and his cohorts, providing weapons and safe passage from Belgrade to Sarajevo. The dual monarchy demanded an answer to the note within 48 hours. After the Austrians had set a fixed date for their ultimatum, Berlin quietly signaled its leaders to return. They did so from July 23rd onward, returning singly so as not to create an uproar. They began to debate what to do next. Germany's overlapping army leaders, Chief of Staff Helmuth von Moltke, War Minister Erich von Falkenhayn, and Military Cabinet Chief Moritz Freiherr von Linker, were among the several key officials debating the issues of war and peace after the return from vacation. For Moltke, the arguments were particularly frustrating, in part because the civilian leaders shared neither his point of view nor his objectives, and in part because they did not know what he knew. A Saxon officer who spoke with Moltke's deputy on July 23rd reported that he received the impression that the great general staff would be pleased if war were to come about now. Moltke did not fear Russian mobilization. He devoutly desired it. Moltke was uniquely aware that time was running out for his country. Germany was committed to follow Moltke's own grand strategy, a strategy few were aware of. The Kaiser, Falkenhayn, and until July 31st, the German Chancellor, Theobald von Bethmann-Hollweg, were among those in the dark. None of them knew that Moltke had already put his plan for his opening moves in the war into motion. On July 25th, Serbia accepted 9 of the points, but rejected, in part, the demand that Austrian officials be involved in the investigation of the assassination, regarding such interference as a challenge to her sovereignty. On July 25th, Serbia mobilized her army. Russia also confirmed partial mobilization before entering a period of preparatory to war on July 26th. Austria reciprocated by mobilizing the same day. Then, on July 28th, the dual monarchy declared war on Serbia. Up to this point, it might still have been possible to isolate the problem, but Germany continued to act in an uncompromising manner, to heighten tensions and to give the crisis an international dimension. On July 29th, Germany demanded an immediate cessation of Russian preparations. Failing to do so would mean that Germany would mobilize her army. The German Imperial Chancellor, Theobald von Bethmann-Hollweg, instructed the ambassador in St. Petersburg.
Kindly call attention to the fact that further confirmation of Russia's mobilization measures would force us to mobilize, and in that case, a European war could scarcely be prevented.
Russia could not afford to acquiesce meekly on the destruction of Serbian sovereignty or increased Austrian influence in Eastern and Southeastern Europe. Consequently, on July 30th, Russia ordered a general mobilization in support of Serbia. Russian mobilization began the following day, but was not the inevitable precursor to war. Her forces could, if necessary, have stayed on their own territory for weeks while negotiations proceeded. The actions of Germany heightened the tension. 1:45 p.m. on July 31st, Germany proclaims a Kriegsgefahrzustand, threatening danger of war. 3:30 p.m., the German government addresses Russia and France. Germany presents Russia with an ultimatum. Unless she demobilizes within 12 hours, full mobilization in Germany will follow. The German ambassador in Paris is told mobilization means war. France is asked for guarantees of neutrality. Events were rapidly moving out of the control of the states. When Russia failed to respond, Germany ordered a general mobilization. Time was running out. Mobilization in each country was the moment when war plans took effect. Nowhere was this clearer than in Germany, since Germany had become a prisoner of her own plan. The Schlieffen Plan had been originally shaped in 1897 and revised in 1905 by Count Alfred von Schlieffen, who was then chief of the German General Staff. Schlieffen's overriding aim was to enable Germany to deal successfully with the strategic nightmare of a two-front war against both Russia and France. However, by appearing to offer a feasible solution to this problem, the plan reduced the Army's fears of a two-front war and strengthened its willingness to accept the risks of such a conflict. Schlieffen estimated that should Germany have to face both France and Russia, the latter would be slower to mobilize and deploy, giving Germany a vital margin of some 6 weeks in which to overpower France by means of a massive and rapid campaign. As soon as France was defeated, Germany could then transfer the bulk of her forces to the east to meet the Russian steamroller. There was a danger, nonetheless, that the fortresses along France's northeastern frontier might fatally delay the German army's lightning western offensive. Accordingly, Schlieffen resolved that German forces must cross a narrow strip of Dutch territory known as the Maastricht Appendix, then sweep through Belgium, trampling neutrality before driving into northwestern France. The pivotal role was given to 5 armies deployed between Metz and Holland, totaling 35 corps in all. The most powerful forces were allocated to the extreme right wing of the offensive. One army there was expected to swing round to the west of Paris, on the outer flank of a colossal wheeling movement, which was intended to take on the opposing French armies in the rear before trapping them against their own frontier. Colonel General Helmuth von Moltke, Schlieffen's successor, made several key alterations to his original plan between 1906 and 1914. Though a diligent and painstaking officer, Moltke was also introspective and suffered from bouts of low self-confidence. He weakened the right flank and abandoned the planned move through Holland. These decisions would prove to be very unfortunate. On August 1st, Germany could wait no longer for an answer from the Tsar and declared war on Russia. Honoring her agreement with Russia, France mobilized and set in motion the remaining cogs in the intricate machinery of European alliances. On August 2nd, Germany handed Belgium an ultimatum, insisting on the right of passage through her territory. The Belgians took even less time to deliver a sharp no. The next day, Germany declared war on France. The French declaration of war quickly followed. Early on August 4th, German forces crossed the frontier into Belgium. The strength of the German armies on this flank was impressive. Colonel General Alexander von Kluck's First Army on the extreme right numbered 320,000 troops. The neighboring Second Army, under Colonel General Karl von Bülow, and the Third Army, commanded by General Max von Hausen, respectively totaled 260,000 and 180,000 troops. The invasion of Belgian territory brought the final major player into the conflict, Great Britain. Britain had no formal agreement with France and Russia, but was committed in principle by a treaty concluded in 1839 to guarantee Belgian neutrality. The hour struck. At 11 p.m. on August 4th, time ran out for the last summer of the Old World. Standing on the balcony at his residence, British Home Secretary Sir Edward Grey watched the lamplighters move along the street below.
The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime.
The armies of Europe were on the move. The coming of the war was greeted with enormous enthusiasm in the capitals of Europe. For each nation, a cause was at hand. In St. Petersburg, a huge crowd congregated with flags, banners, icons, and portraits of Tsar Nicholas. The Emperor Nicholas responded to the chants of his people by appearing on the palace balcony overlooking the square. The entire crowd knelt at once and sang the Russian national anthem. In Paris, a French officer, leaving with his regiment for Verdun, wrote,
Our great nation's heart was beating tumultuously as in days long past. Crowds were gathered at every station, behind every barrier, and at every window along our road. Cries of Vive la France and Vive l'armée could be heard everywhere, while people waved handkerchiefs and hats. The women were throwing kisses and heaped flowers on our convoy, and the young men were shouting Au revoir and à bientôt. At one grade crossing, a young woman lifted her baby towards us, shouting, He too, like you, will go someday and do his duty. It must have been like this in 1792. The soul of France had again attained the height of her greatest period in history.
In Berlin, the Kaiser appeared before the Reichstag, dressed in a field gray army uniform, to address the tumultuous crowd.
I have no knowledge any longer of party or creed. I know only Germans, and in token thereof, I ask all of you to give me your hands.
Not only did they give him their hands, but unanimously, they gave him an unprecedented war credit of 620,000 marks. In London, Saturday, August 1st, was a quiet day for the officer at London's main recruiting office. Only 8 recruits presented themselves to volunteer for duty. Then came Sunday, and Monday was an August bank holiday. When he returned to his office on August the 4th, the crowd waiting for him was so dense that it took him 20 minutes and the help of 20 policemen to get through to his desk. From that minute on, he worked through the day, testing and swearing in the recruits.
The sergeant said, Are you willing to join? I said, Yes, sir. He said, How old are you? I said, I'm 18 and 1 month. He said, Do you mean 19 and 1 month? So I thought a moment. I said, Yes, sir. He said, Right, I will sign here, please. He said, You realize you can go overseas.
When Lord Kitchener's first appeal went out for 100,000 new recruits, what followed was unending throughout Britain. 100 men an hour, 3,000 a day. 6,000 over the war's first weekend joined the army. So many came now that many had to be turned away. The liberal Manchester Guardian, long a platform for pacifist opinion, said in its editorial page on August the 5th, England declared war on Germany at 11 o'clock last night. All controversy is therefore at an end. Our front is united. Now there is nothing for Englishmen to do but stand together and help by every means in their power to obtain our common object, an early and decisive victory over Germany. In Munich, a crowd gathered in the Odeonplatz to celebrate the declaration of war. In the center of the crowd was a failed Austrian artist named Adolf Hitler. After leaving the plaza, he at once petitioned the King of Bavaria to be allowed to volunteer for the Bavarian army. In Paris, there was no French monarch to incite the citizens. Reservists not yet called were already putting their affairs in order. In most armies, the day before the stipulated date for reporting was a free day for farewells to family and friends. The line of trains leaving starting areas throughout Europe was unending. The railway section of the German Great General Staff timetable accounted for the movement of 11,000 trains in the mobilization period. No less than 2,150 wagon trains containing 54 wagons each crossed the Hohenzollern Bridge over the Rhine between August 2nd and August 18th. The chief French railway companies had, since May 1912, a plan to concentrate 7,000 trains for mobilization. Many had been moved near the entraining centers days before the war was officially declared. Feet were as important as trains in 1914. Horses' feet as well as men's feet. For after detraining in the concentration area, cavalry and infantry deployed into the line of march. There were 5,000 horses in an infantry division in 1914, more than 5,000 horses in a cavalry division. All had to be kept shod and healthy if the 20 miles in a day were to be covered as required by the Schlieffen timetable. An infantry division on the march filled 14 miles of road, and the endurance of horses, along with that of the infantry, was pushed to the limit in the race to drive the advance forward. General von Kluck's First Army on the far right faced a march of 200 miles from detraining points to the French capital. Before Paris, however, there was Liège and Namur, and the other fortresses of the Belgian rivers, which impeded any easy crossing for a German army into France.
Up to your waist in water, up to your eyes in sludge, using the kind of language that makes the sergeant blush. Oh, wouldn't join the army, that's what we all inquire. Don't we pity the poor civilians sitting around the fire? Oh, 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 it's a lovely war. It's a lovely war. To be a soldier, eh? Oh, it's a shame to take the pain. As soon as Reveille is gone, we feel just as heavy as lead. But we never get up to the sergeant brings the breakfast up to bed. Oh, 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 it's a lovely war. What do we want with eggs and ham when we got plum and apple jam? Home falls right, son, how will we spend the money we earn? Oh, 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 it's a lovely war. Oh, 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 it's a lovely war. Oh, to be a soldier, eh? Oh, it's a shame to take the pain. As soon as the valley is gone, we feel just as heavy as lead. But we never get up to the sergeant brings our breakfast up to bed. What? Oh, 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 it's a lovely war. What do we want with eggs and ham when we got plum and apple jam? Home for us, retard, when we spend the money we earn. Oh, 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 it's a lovely war. Come to the cookhouse door, boys, sniff at the lovely stew. Oh, as it says the colonel gets better grub than you. Any complaints this morning? Do we complain? Not we. What's the matter with lumps of onion floating around your tea? Oh, 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 it's a lovely war. Oh, wouldn't be a soldier, eh? Oh, it's a shame to take the pain. As soon as the valley has gone, we feel just as heavy as lead. But we never get up to the sergeant brings our breakfast up to bed. Rats. Oh, 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 it's a lovely war.